Hey everyone, it's Ankylosaur. I hope you're all doing well. Today, I've got another Competitive Pauper EDH video for you all, this time focused on cards that are also legal in one of my favorite 60 card formats, Premodern. Now, just to be clear, none of these cards see widespread play in Premodern, but it's that era of Magic that we're talking about, from 1995 to 2003. That gives us a card pool from 4th edition up through Scourge. So, all old bordered, all classic cards that, if you're an old man like me, saw play when you were a kid growing up in the mid to late 90s. If you're curious about the sweet decks you can play in Premodern, head on over to their homepage, premodernmagic.com, where you can see some sample decks, check out the ban list, and learn more about this awesome format. But, as always, our main focus for this video is cards that may be a little bit overlooked and maybe a little bit underplayed in CPDH. Some of those may be deep cuts that if you're a newer player, you may not have played against before. And I wanted to highlight some of this old tech and talk about their applications in Pauper Commander. So let's jump right in. Our first card is Righteous Aura, originally a common from Visions that got bumped up to uncommon in Mercadian Masks. It's a 2-mana white enchantment with an ability that, for 1 white mana and 2 life, you can prevent all damage the source of your choice would deal to you. This card is an absolute house against certain more aggressive strategies, basically reducing any source of damage down to just the 2 life that you pay. So imagine you're playing against Dargo, for instance. Rather than taking a 7-ball worth of commander damage to the face, you can just pay white and 2 life and prevent it all. Or you're facing down some 4/1 skeletons from Gut, which really are probably 6/3s with Inspiring Leader in play. You can turn that 6 into a much more manageable 2. I've seen this card played in Vizkopa Guildmage before, as that deck gains a lot of life and is able to activate Righteous Aura basically with impunity. But I think it's a solid addition to any white deck looking to shore up some of its beatdown matchups, if that's something that's prevalent in your meta. Next, we have a couple of blue cards that work pretty well together. First is Rush of Knowledge, a 5-mana blue sorcery that draws you cards equal to the greatest mana value among permanents you control. 5 is kind of a lot of mana, but think about how many cards you can be drawing off of this thing. Imagine, for instance, you have a Tolarian Terror in play, or the newly downshifted Cryptic Serpent. 5 mana for an entirely new hand of 7 cards is a great rate, considering some of the other card draw options that we have available in the format. And even if you can't live the dream with a Serpent in play, imagine you have a Mnemonic Wall, or a more expensive commander like Melik or Rilsa Rail. 5 cards for 5 mana is still fantastic, and will juice you right back up to grind into the late game. I wanted to talk about this card alongside another one, originally from Legends, but reprinted in 4th edition, and that's Energy Tap. This is a sorcery for 1 blue mana that taps a creature you control to add colorless mana equal to its mana value to your mana pool. Imagine again that we have a Tolarian Terror in play. We can tap it with Energy Tap, get our 7 mana, and then chain that into our Rush of Knowledge. That's 7 cards with 3 mana still left over to start casting stuff right away. And even if we don't live that particular dream, there are plenty of big, relatively expensive card draw spells in blue that would benefit from this burst of mana. Even with nothing in our graveyard, we can Treasure Cruise, draw our 3, and refuel. I can see this as a great addition to certain builds of Malcolm Dargo as well, getting a huge infusion of mana on a key turn to let you really pop off. Next, our black card is a mana dork that I like very much, and that's Soldevi Adnate. This is a 2-mana 1/2 that lets you sacrifice a black or artifact creature to add an amount of black mana equal to its mana value. There are a bunch of uses for this. First, in a typical black deck, you're going to have creatures like Phyrexian Rager or a Dusk Legion Zealot laying around. They cantrip, you get your value off them, but their bodies aren't particularly impressive. So Soldevi Adnate can let you cash these guys in to double spell in a turn, or to power out an even bigger threat several turns earlier than you would otherwise be able to. She also works great with creatures that you want to die anyway, like an Abyssal Gatekeeper, or something like Perilous Mirror. Black is full of creatures with abilities that trigger when they die, and Adnate is a perfect way to sacrifice those, get some black mana, and maybe use that mana on a removal spell to take something else out. She reminds me a lot of another mana dork that I feel like needs a home in the format, and that's Priest of Yawgmoth. Priest of Yawgmoth is a little too old school to be pre-modern, since he's from Antiquities. We'll add a little asterisk here. But he's got a great mess of a text box too, but his Oracle text is pretty simple. You tap, sacrifice an artifact, add an amount of black mana equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Just like Soldevi Adnate, you can use him to cash in cards that have already gotten you value from entering the battlefield, like Ichor Wellspring. But he also works phenomenally well with things that have affinity for artifacts. You can cast something for a reduced cost, and use Priest as a giant ritual for whatever big spells you need. I'm kind of a sucker for aristocrat-style decks, and both of these are a fantastic fit for those strategies. So if you're building a deck like that, maybe give these guys a look. For a red card, I have a sweeper that sort of flew under my radar, and that's Bloodfire Infusion. This is a 3-mana aura you can only put on one of your creatures, but it lets you sacrifice that creature to deal damage equal to the creature's power to each creature in play. There aren't a ton of board wipes in CPDH that deal more than a couple damage to everything. One of the notable exceptions is Swirling Sandstorm, which hits everything without flying for 5 as long as you have Threshold. But what if you don't have Threshold, or you need to kill some bird tokens or something? Bloodfire Infusion can get you there. If you put it on the right creature, it can be a 4-mana Wrath, sort of like Chain Reaction in regular EDH. It's not quite as powerful as Chain Reaction, and you can definitely get blown out if someone goes to remove your creature when you target it with the infusion, but there are upsides as well. You can put this on a 3-power creature and kill most of the board, but not your 4-toughness creatures, which can then swing in unimpeded. I think it's a solid card for more controlling decks that are looking to keep the board clear and reposition themselves on an empty playing field. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments though. I'd love to hear your takes on it. Next up is green, and I've got a pretty spicy one for you in Provoke. Provoke is a 2-mana instant that reads, untap target creature you don't control. That creature blocks this turn if able. Draw a card. At first glance, this seems like a bad fight spell, but Provoke is really so much more. First of all, it's an instant, which lets you cast it on an opponent's turn to mess with their combat, which I love. Someone attacks a Gretchen player, for instance, and you provoke their commander or one of their summoning sick untappers, and suddenly you've turned your opponent's creature into a removal spell. But where Provoke truly shines is against gut decks, because of the way it interacts with Menace. This is a lot of text, and I don't want you to read it all, but I copied and pasted it from the section in the Magic Comprehensive Rules on blocking. If you want to look it up, this is section 509.1c. I'm not going to read this full paragraph, but look at the example down below. Player A controls 2 creatures, one of which blocks if able, and player B has a creature with Menace. The example reads, if a creature with Menace attacks that player, the player must block with both creatures. Not just the one that blocks if able, both of them. Let's look at this example in an actual game. Player A, playing Gut, has a skeleton token. That skeleton has Menace, and is attacking player B, who controls a Malcolm and a Firebrand Archer. You're player C. You have nothing to do with this combat, but it would greatly benefit you if all 3 of these creatures were gone. So you cast Provoke, targeting the Malcolm. This forces Malcolm to block the skeleton, but because of how blocks if able interacts with Menace, the Firebrand Archer gets sucked into combat as well, and must block the skeleton for this to be a legal block. The end result is, all 3 creatures die, and you even get to draw a card, collecting a nice 4-for-1. It's not bad for 2 green mana. Finally, I had to throw an artifact in here at the end, and that's Skyshaper. Skyshaper is 2 mana, originally an uncommon from Exodus, but thanks to Tempest Remastered on MTGO, it's been downshifted to a common, so you can play it in Pauper EDH. It's very simple. You sacrifice it, and all your creatures gain flying until end of turn. There aren't a ton of effects like this in CPDH, where you can basically make your whole team unblockable for a turn. We get cards like Dirge of Dread, or I guess like Veiling Oddity, which I do not recommend playing, but it does technically exist. I was thinking about this card in decks that both go wide and care about artifacts. So something like Third Path Iconoclast, or an Abdel deck that wants to send its army of soldiers to the skies to finish someone off. In the early game, you can just exile Skyshaper with Abdel for another token, and then later, when you've amassed a board, you can sacrifice it for the wind. This is definitely a pet card of mine, but I can see places where it could really shine in the format. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. As always, please leave a comment below if you have your own sweet pre-modern tech that I've missed, or if there's anything else you'd like to add that I didn't cover. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!